Perfect, perfect. Hey, thanks everyone who joined us on time, and thank you for your time today. For the last couple of weeks, we've been going around this whole topic of data products, right? And I think me and Rajesh almost exchange this idea on a daily basis around data products. I think I talk more around data products every day than what I actually talk about. I talk to my wife. I think I'd spend more time talking about this whole conceptual model, speaking with Rajesh, speaking with Venkat, speaking with Sanjeev, and a lot of the folks around that. This is an extension of our sessions that we had in the past. We started with historically what is a data product and how why is it important. Venkat covered about the life cycle of data products. For the next week, this week and the next week, what we're going to talk about is something very foundational, right? What is the anatomy of a data product? What is the building blocks of a data product? And I think this is where it's very important for us all people who have been in data engineering communities, like coming from a data engineering background, doing ETL work, data quality work, data governance work, to understand our roles and how different is the enterprise architecture going to be when we think in a data product world. Is it largely similar? Is it somewhat similar, or is it like totally different than what we have been doing, right? I think let's all collectively contribute to this. It's all early stages. You will see a lot of people pushing around this whole notion of data products in the industry. You'll see I don't know if Gartner has started this, but I bumped into a Harvard article recently. I saw a McKinsey article recently around data products. So everybody's going to talk about it, right? So I think we are all early in this journey. Let's have this good exchange over this session. And what we are happy to have today, and I think personally, I'm also very happy to have Rajesh with me today, and for both the sessions discussing about the anatomy of a data product, right? Without further ado, I think, Rajesh, I want to pause here and allow you to introduce yourself, tell the forum around what you do, what's your background, and then we'll go into the anatomy of a data product.
Sure. So, hi folks, this is Rajesh Parikh. I'm the founder and CEO of Cynepia Technologies. We built this company around building data product platform, which essentially gets you all the way from your raw data to getting the products out. More about the company and the product, I would leave it for a separate discussion. Please do reach out if you'd like to see our product and want to know a little more about what we do. My personal background essentially has been around building systems over multiple decades. At some point, we built this largest routers for Cisco. In the initial journey, we've had many of the internet companies today, which are probably acquired by Cisco or Juniper. They've actually used some of the products that we built over years, right? And as I started up looking out for opportunities to build, data seemed like an obvious choice because there was a lot of chaos, and that is how Cynepia came about in the being, right? So that's kind of my backgrounds over years, building stuff for internet and now building stuff for data.
Perfect, Rajesh. Right. So I think let's go into the topic again in the interest of time, and the audience were here. Let's go into the anatomy of a data product. I think you and me exchange on this a lot. But then, see, let me also throw you a question, right? A lot of us come from the data engineering background where we used to the system thinking of, this is my source, I connect to the source, this is my ETL, this is my ELT layer, or this is my transformation layer, data quality, data governance under these. So if you look at the enterprise architecture, that's pretty much what we do, right? So if you can relate to that and probably share with us your perspective on that, I think that's going to be very helpful. And again, anybody on the audience, if you have any questions, please use the chat window. I would look into the queries and then share it with Rajesh or interrupt him, right? So feel free to interrupt us, right? You can unmute your line, but I would prefer if you can use the chat window first, and we can choose so that we're able to have a very decent recording at the end, right? So perfect, Rajesh, over to you. You should be able to present on your side.
Yeah. So before I get into the presentation, I mean, some of those questions are covered in the presentation, short video, all of that. But a brief context, the way I think about the enterprise architecture, data architecture particularly. By the way, I write a lot about architectures as well. So if you want to look at the Substack and do want to read about architectures, then do subscribe to my Substack account. Having said that, enterprise architectures also haven't been static. Over years, they've evolved. We've evolved from monolithic to microservices, and now we're talking about something in the middle.
Yeah.
This has also happened to data architectures. For example, we've gone from monolithic to completely fragmented, and now there are again rumors or at least talks of consolidation and sort of bigger feature bundles, if you would call that way, right? So we've never been static. That's one. Also, the pieces of the puzzle that we put in the stack have also not been stagnant, and that is where probably I would want to start this particular presentation. Free to sort of come in the middle and stop me if it feels too structured. I think we can have a more cross table this conversation instead of being more structured.
Yeah, perfect. And I'll interrupt you here also, Rajesh, right? Just can you define what a data product is for me?
You want to start there? I just want to start with the journey, if you let me. And
yeah, perfect.
Yeah,
sure. That helps as well. Yeah.
Right. So if you guys this is a short video that would just act as a reference.
Yeah, Rajesh, you're not sharing a screen. If you can, that'll be helpful.
You're not seeing my screen right now?
No, not yet.
Okay, hold. I am sharing already.
No, we don't see it yet.
Okay, hold on. Share everything. Now, are you sharing my screen?
Yeah, now we can. Yes.
Okay. So I'm just sharing a short video to make sure that all of our memories have a common reference.
Perfect. Yeah, just move on to this thing. Thank you.
One sec. Let me just start again.
Yeah, if there was an audio, there was no audio that we can hear. But
you're not getting the audio?
No, that's okay. We'll figure it out. Or probably you want to voice this over, if that's okay.
No,
that's still fine.
Yeah, I'm just starting trouble, but let me just. You're saying that the audio is not there?
No. Well, it's okay. In case you can voice it over. You can voice it over. That should be fine.
Yeah. I think I figured out. It should work now. Is that audible now?
Yes, now it is, yeah.
मीटिंग आप
Here the catalog here. See, essentially, what has happened is over years, as we have seen, what has happened is we found a good justification for ourselves to say why we are doing what we're doing, and most of the time it felt sane in the time context that we were in. And so in 2006, when somebody said, "Hey, data is the new oil," we started collecting as much as it was possible, and then we had this new problem where we had to process it to create the customer value. And as we started doing that, we started onboarding more use cases, more models, all of that. We ended up in a situation where we have these products which are most of the time not reliable, not repeatable in terms of the customer experience, right? So that's been the journey so far. And in order to fix that problem, we are now talking about data quality, observability, and the other pieces of the puzzle. But what's fascinating, if you observe a little more closely about this whole stack, is that the needs have been evolving, and the stack is actually doing the catch up with the customer needs. Uh, and where we are now is at a point where the data teams, which have been mostly doing extract, transform, load, and believe that's the work, versus the consumer who really doesn't care about it, who cares about the correctness, repeatable experience, and all of that. Right. So we have the languages which are mismatching here. One of them is more technical, and the other is more about these abstract things, which is trust, correctness, not about the way I model and the other pieces of it. Genesis of the problem of how we have built what we built and where we stand today. Right. So I will just move further. This is kind of a start view of where we stand today. And I just want to get a little deeper with this picture. If you actually look at it, we started with a much simpler view of the stack. And where we stand today is we've kept adding pieces. So we needed input validations. We now need agreements. The small nodes that you see out here, if you're seeing my pointers, are actually the data outputs that either the analytical engineer is producing or let's say the BI analyst who is producing within the dashboards right here, or the data scientist or the advanced analytics engineer or software engineer who is producing here, right? Now, what we've ended up is each of these products are actually looking like a complex DAG or a graph, and they in turn are dependent on each other, right? Making the problem even more complex, because if one of them breaks down, all the things downstream of that is going to really be a challenge to meet the expectation on trust and things like that, right? So we've gone through that part, and now this is one of the issues, which is that we've made it complicated. But while all of that is happening, if you go back in time when we were not on the cloud warehouse, we had very controlled set of data sources. And the data architect and the data team had a good control of that centralized behavior, where if a data source changes, then even before the consumer actually sees it, the situation would actually be controlled, right? And the number of users were much lower than what we have today. The BI itself has gone further 2 levels down in the organization, right? So just for a simple app like a BI or a dashboard, as the number of users grew on one hand, on the right, and on the left, the number of sources grew, the reports and everything really weren't trustworthy, right? So
This is more of a current landscape, right, Rajesh? So,
right,
what do you?
right.
Yeah. So something I think all of us have it in the.
We've been patch fixing a platform which we've heavily invested in. And by the way, this diagram is only to show that it's even more complex, because we are finding feature after feature which is missing in terms of what will add to the consumer experience, and then we kept adding one after another.
Yeah.
Right. So that is fundamentally where this diagram sort of provides the baseline of where we stand today.
And also, I think we discover new problems. I think as and when we got more data and more data sources in particular, right? See, I think cloud warehouses were bought in, and then we figured out, hey, In my legacy, I did not worry too much about the data quality because I was not paying for consumption, so it was not hitting my bill. I sized sized the warehouse and I left it. So I was not getting a recurring bill. So when it comes to cloud, I started feeling that okay, now I'm moving junk. Now I need an observability layer. I need a contract layer. I need to add. You're right. I think I'm adding more layers into the puzzle, but still it's not coming together. Yeah.
Yeah, and there are technical reasons for it. There are also reasons for how we started building the stack, which is, what did we say? We want to store as much of raw data as possible, and we will then figure out how to process it, right? And how to create value out of it. So our start point also is a reason why we are where we are.
Yeah.
We never started with the product thinking. We started with the thinking of a refinery, which is what that small video really talked about, right?
Yeah.
So we were always talking about refining and keeping it ready so that somebody can then dip into it and get the value that he wants to derive out of it.
Got it. But we're still developing products, right, Rajesh? So I know you may cover it in your session to this week or next week.
We are. In fact, I was about to say that, for instance, the data product as a term, the first time I believe somebody said was data mesh in a formal language. But when the advanced analytics teams and the data products are not a new thing. It's been happening for a while because they've been considered high value. For instance, let's say a recommendation, an engine in Amazon. It's been there for a while, right?
Yeah.
Or for that matter, a Tesla as a car. It's also a car which is a model in itself, right?
Yeah.
So it's not like it's not been happening, but they've been really attributed to very, very high value data products.
Yeah.
If we call it that way. But what we're realizing is everything is a data product, whether it's low value or a high value. Because at the end of the day, and that is where I want to take off from this slide, is that we are starting to believe that it's not just enough to know what's in the table or how does the schema of that particular table looks, right? Because you're now worried about, for instance, data contracts, right? Data contracts is more than a schema. You want to know, hey, what is the distribution of a certain column? What is the percentage of null? What is duplicates? All of that, right?
Yeah.
So you're getting into the distribution of the columns. You're getting into more specifics of, hey, how is this table different in terms of the data than the other version of the same table? And how would it break the customer experience, right? So that's another piece, right? Input validation is to handle the variations with every batch of data that's coming in. And then you're talking about contracts, serviceability. How do I debug if something goes wrong? It's a terribly, terribly woeful situation with this stack that we have today. And it adds to the pressure for the data engineers and anybody who's working on a very critical app which is suddenly broken down, right? There's also this notion, which is very common in software engineering, that you could possibly have an SRE, or let's say site reliability engineer, who could defend that if something breaks in the middle of night, but that's simply not possible in data today, right? So we are probably getting into a zone where we're saying that data tables are fine, but they're not products, right? A product has table plus something more. And that more is what, at least in my term and the definition that you asked me, is you take a data artifact, any data artifact, let's say the table and the metadata, you add all of these non-functional attributes that the customer is demanding, and actually takes the shape of a product, right? Because these non-functional attributes that we're talking about, for instance, just the repeatability and the trust that we are really that the customer is really wanting, would need us to do something every single time so that trust is actually achieved.
Yeah, sure. Rajesh, can I interrupt you for a minute here? Just for the benefit of the 20 people here. Now, when you say trust, we are defining, again, kind of using common language here with a lot of data engineers here. We're talking about data quality, the trustability of this of the data, which is around, hey, I'm measuring for expectations, I'm measuring for semantics and all of that. I'm calculating a trust score or things like
No.
that. Is that
I
okay?
actually don't mean any of those. I mean what the
Okay.
consumer means. Those are
Mm,
all means to get that end, which is trust, right?
mm.
Or you might convert the language which data engineer likes, but let's not really. I mean, a trust in real life, even a data engineer would not use the same way. I'll give you an example of it. I think I have it somewhere in subsequent
Yeah,
slides. But fundamentally, trust is very simple. You bought a product from the market and it works every single time when you are actually using it or consuming it, right? Now, that is what would enhance the trust from a consumer standpoint. Let's take your iPhone, for example, right?
yeah,
It works every single time, and that is what you expect from a product, which is that it'll work every single time. Not if, let's say, the next patch of data comes and boom, we don't have it working,
yeah.
right? So that is what I would call trust, and therefore you're starting to add more to table schema. We're talking about distribution, we're talking about profile, we're talking about lineage, we're talking about everything that goes in making making the data artifact work in the consumer's mind, right?
Correct.
And that really is what a data product uh, would need to do if it really needs to live its promise.
Perfect. Sure.
Right. So I think just a quick one. This is again not my slide, but the URL below. The data teams are overwhelmed, and this is a widely acceptable fact today that the stack that we're managing today, we have been dealing with qualities, and this is not really by chance, in my opinion. Like I said before, the number of data sources, input sources have been growing. The data stacks are moving data, shifting data, storing and shifting data from left to right. And essentially, what that is really doing is when the data changes, the change also flows along with the path of the data all the way, right?
Yeah.
And impacting all the use cases, right? So
Yeah.
that's really what is keeping everybody busy. The consumer isn't happy, the data teams themselves are overwhelmed, and that's the situation we have it today.
Yeah, but yeah, that's a problem that I think almost everybody would agree with on this call. That data quality is definitely a problem. But aren't we adding, like you showed in the previous slide, we're adding more validation rules, input validation, and observability, and still the problem is not getting fixed. I think that's a separate topic and debate on its own. But then, yeah,
No,
I'll allow you to
yeah,
continue.
no, it is not getting fixed because we are reacting to the need itself, right? We have this data infra, we have built it in a certain way, and now we are having these new layers to create because we really need to address the issue. It's frustrating and it's inefficient or whatever, right? It was not built for some of these new scenarios that
Yeah.
were not expected earlier, right? So this is from a venture beat, very recent last week, and it caught my eye. I thought that it was relevant for this particular presentation. But I think you guys can definitely go check that out. I think Ashwin, you're going to share the presentation.
Yeah, yeah, we can. Yeah, sure.
Right. So these 3 points, it's quite wordy, but let me read it for everybody. But fundamentally, they're calling call for action, which is, hey, time to make 3 critical changes right away, right? Which is shift from data warehouse to data lakehouse. I personally would say iffy, but their benefits that they are talking about is to cost effectively support the rising volume, variety, and velocity of data and reduce time consuming and expensive data movement. I think the second part is interesting to me, for sure, right? Because I think we're spending a lot of time moving the data, and that certainly has some space for doing better. Transitioning from siloed business intelligence dashboards to data products. Now, this is interesting because you're talking about dashboards also as data products here, and something that we're going to cover when we talk about anatomy of the various kinds of data products. Uh, but it's look at the feel of what is in the bracket, which is fast and responsive, optimized for high concurrency, works in real time all the time, right? And I think that sums up for me the non-functional requirements of this particular data product that this consumer is expecting, right? Increased focus on real time and AI operationalization, providing compelling customer experiences requires that an organization's data and analytics infrastructure be optimized for decisions in real time. Now, these are three call for actions that they're calling out. But this is from an investor community article. So I thought it was interesting to see that some people are seeing the way we see the world changing again.
Yeah, I think I agree with you, Rajesh. I think almost last 1 month, I had a lot of conversations. In fact, I am like yesterday and today, I at least had 3 conversations with partners who are basically consulting on behalf of their customers, talk to me about data products. So data products is going to be a real thing. And data lake houses are going to be a layer on which a lot of these data products are going to be built as well. I think kind of you got to agree with what this article is and the author basically has conveyed here. It's reality. It's happening. We're seeing it in front of us, right? And I think that's great. Yeah.
Right. I think there was this brief on what is a product and what is trust, and I thought that it would be relevant for us to just go back to physical world and see how we see the product. Uh, I mean, the first line is the value chain for the humble flakes that we have. And if you bought let's say, a bag of flakes, you would have probably not paid a whole lot if you bought it in the raw form, or let's say the consumable form. I will not call it the raw form, but if you just converted it to Kellogg's cornflakes, right, and you would have probably paid 40x of that, or 10x of that, right? And if you added something more to it, it would further go up on value. And if you probably had let's say, a Mexican soup, corn soup, you would have probably paid much more for the same 100 gram of it, right? Now, what's really happening here is the first one is obviously the base product. Between that and the Kellogg's, there's not much of value add if you think about it, right? Although if you ask the customers of Kellogg's, they would probably come back and tell you, hey, we want Kellogg's cornflakes. We don't want the raw version of it, even if it's more or less the same. Because what's really sticks out there is the statement of, I stand for this. For instance, you see that original there. I'm the original cornflakes, and there's a repeatable taste, right? And there is a repeatable understanding of what this product really stands for. And every single time you buy it, you probably have the same experience, right? And that's the real value add here. If you think about it, even in terms of proteins or the other things that they're claiming in the base version, is probably what the base corn has. It hasn't really changed much, right? But then the second one is a product. The first one is not, right? And that is how we look at it in the physical world, right? And first one is also a product, but just that we don't perceive the value of the product the same way we would perceive the value of Kellogg's cornflake, right? The same thing goes through the rice chain. If you look at it, the same rice packaged, probably measured for quality, length of the grain, all of that, converted to a certain brand, cost you 4 times more. Converted to a little more derived product, it would cost you much more, right? What data products really does is takes the same concept. It's not really inventing anything new. It's just taking the same concepts and saying that the data producers, which is, let's say, the data teams, right? You need to value what you're producing, and the value needs to be seen not by you, by your consumers, right? And when does the consumer see the value? One, there is a repeatable experience every single time, right? There is value which is measurable, right? For instance, if you go from Kellogg's cornflakes to the one with the honey and almond, you will be able to differentiate what is the difference between the two products, and hence you will be able to pay for, or you will be willing to pay for one versus another, right? And likewise, when you go consume, let's say, the same soup in Taj or one of those 7 stars, you would probably be willing to pay more, right? But then every single time you go, you would probably get the same experience, right? So there is ingredient, which is the core function, but there's a lot more happening beyond the core function. And that's really what makes each of these products in their own ways, but in different value curve, essentially. Any thoughts on this? What do you guys think? I mean, are we producing in the data world, the data products the same way, or what we call data tables today?
Partially, yes. I think I'll allow other folks to unmute their line and answer that as well. But I would say so in parts, right? So the first column, what you see is what we produce today largely as data engineers, right? We produce the facts and dimensions, which is a little bit more curated. It's still not the raw form of data. It's still more curated. But then we don't drive repeatability and value by creating just that. The repeatability and value comes from probably a consumable layer like BI, or a consumable layer like let's say churn model, for example. That's repeatable, drives a value, as opposed to just producing just raw schemas out there in my warehouse. Right. That's my observation.
I mean, look, I just wanted to take the same example that you gave. The BI does not drive trust and repeatability. BI simply drives the value part, but BI itself cannot ensure trust and repeatability if the data in the upstream food chain is not measuring up to the contracts that the end customer needs.
Yeah. Probably
right?
you may want to give a deep dive example as well if you can. Yeah. If you
So in fact, this is incidental because yesterday only I posted a small note on this. Because for the numbers in your OLAP, I mean, what are you doing in the BI? You're basically taking a bunch of OLAP, you're building a bunch of OLAP cubes, right? In a dashboard is nothing but a collection of OLAP cubes, which are built on top of a bunch of fact tables, dimension tables, which in turn are created from a bunch of raw tables, right? From different sources. Now, for these numbers that you're seeing on the dashboard to really stick, everything else below has to work. The BI cannot really make it happen. Right? So if anything goes wrong at any of those upstream ends, you are not going to have the BI cannot serve the repeatable experience to its customers.
If the BI would break there, yeah, for sure.
BI won't break, but the number is not accurate.
Yeah, correct. That's what I call it. I'm calling and referring to as breaking. Yes, yeah. So
So that alone, see, there is something stable state. When you're looking at this Kellogg's conflict, nothing has changed in the product, but then the repeatability is never compromised, right?
Yeah.
The repeatability and trust is not compromised, and that would be table stake even for a dashboard if it has to be a product.
Yeah, perfect.
Right, so in fact, we have the right slide. Therefore, I mean, I just want to leave these 4 thoughts and those bottom 2 blue lines with you. Rest you can forget whatever happened so far. But just that we will say, hey, some of the table stake requirements, these are not all, is repeatable and consistent experience. Extremely important. Meets the expected quality. I mean, there is a set standard for a product, and it therefore stands up to that quality, right? The packaging and overall experience, reduce friction to consumption. This is extremely important. The 4th one, which I actually didn't talk about, but why does Kellogg's conflicts or Kellogg's conflicts with honey almond really serve better end consumer than, let's say, the regular corn, right? Because it does some additional work which reduces friction to consumption.
Yeah.
Right? Or let's say the soup that you see on the right.
Can you give a data example on friction to consumption? Again, just for the benefit of us, the audience here.
Yeah. So those are the 4 things. In the data world, what we've done is, hey, we will put everything as facts and dimensions. Now go dip and find what you need.
Yeah.
right? And that is not how the consumer markets work. You go meet the consumer all the way to his or her expectation. And that's how the markets evolve. So we are still selling the gunny bags of rice, if I may take that analogy, which is lots of tables and lots of data sets and lots of schemas. We are not really selling the products, right?
Yeah,
So
we're not. Yeah.
where are those bottom things you need non-functional attributes for something to be a product. Many of them could be table stake, even to get qualified to be a product, and then you need a finished product as a serving layer. These are the two primary motivations.
Perfect. Yeah.
Right. So I keep it there. Obviously, when we talk about so many things, the change is never going to be easy, and there are barriers, right? The data teams across the board have too many things on their plate. They've been handling too many. They've spent all of the time building big data sets, managing them, keeping them up running so that the BI and the other teams can pick it, right? And it's not been easy to maintain the base quality, right? And then there has been fragmentation of technology, tools, even ownership within the enterprises. And this is also not helping either, right? So these are obviously the barriers for change. We're obviously not covering them here in this forum, but it's something that if somebody's thinking about the data product, this would come in mind. Although I've seen some recent data where a lot of teams which started with the data mesh, that number has grown significantly over the last 1 year. So it looks like that there are companies which are reconfiguring themselves to really embrace this new idea. Right?
Yeah,
But
I
this is
think
obviously about reconfiguration, yeah.
Yeah, I think mesh and data products are becoming mainstream conversations, at least.
Yeah.
I somehow consider my network to be reactive because I don't work with the direct customers. I work through my indirect partners, and they're talking about products on the most like 2 times in 2 days. So yeah, it's almost every single day. Last week we had some conversations around that. So I think data products and in data mesh, some of these conversations come from a mesh-driven strategy. So and then comes to data products. Some of these conversations are also directly about data products without a mesh as well. So I think both of these are pretty much valid. So I think that's one common misconception, that you need to have a mesh to build data products, but then not necessarily. Again, a separate topic. I think if you have time towards the end of this call, we'll take and address that also. Rajesh, again, in the interest of time, I leave the floor to you.
Yeah. I'm moving faster on this, but this is just a quick view. Remember what I said, you have the base output, the table and the schema, plus you need the product thinking. And remember, we said non-functional attributes is core to the product thinking. When you marry these two, you have the data products. And then you've collapsed basically the data teams into data product teams and the data consumers. So they are directly on the talking line in some ways. And in between is the product that we have, right? This is just a diagram of how at 1,000 feet a data product would look like. There is infra in the middle. Then you have the data.
Rajesh, can I interrupt? Is the infra Snowflake? Is the infra Databricks, or it can be anything?
I don't want to open that up for now.
Today?
It can be anything for now. Let's assume I will open that up, but for now, just to reduce the complexity, let's assume it could be anything.
Okay.
Right. Having said that, let's look at what we need at the end of it. We need a storage. We need computes, right? And we need relational engines and other kinds of engines.
Yeah.
Right. These are the 4 things we need. If you still want to put something to it.
Yeah.
But then there are more things. We will discuss that. Right.
Okay. Perfect.
But these 4 things are there. Then you have data, metadata. These 2 are very well understood. The logic, this is also very well understood, because today you write your SQL stored procedures, all of that, right? What is not understood is the non-functional, which is around the boundary, and how do they get into the product, right? And that would be the focus for the anatomy of a data product.
Yeah, perfect. So, but are we not doing the non-functional attributes to some extent? For example, the discoverability is now solved with a catalog. The governance is also solved through a catalog. Again, I know these are debatable topics.
Yeah,
Observability is solved through, let's say, data observability tools to some extent, or through data quality tools. Uh, I'm
absolutely.
not again going to take categories here. People are doing this in parts and pieces, but how different is it when we start thinking about data products? I think that's
Yeah,
where that question, I am sure, remains with a lot of people also. I just want to
yeah, yeah.
ask on their behalf as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think a very good question, because a lot of these things that we're talking about are also part of data products, right? So what makes data products different than, let's say, having a catalog outside, or
Yeah,
having an observability tool outside, so on and so forth, right? It's a valid question, and there is a reasonable answer to that as we get into the next set of slides. I think it would become self-explanatory,
perfect, perfect.
right? How much time do we have? We are at 12:40.
We've got another 15 minutes. So,
Okay. See, I'm going to stop at just sharing one data product anatomy today, and then we will take the rest to the next session,
sure.
whenever we do it. But
The next week.
fundamentally, yeah, fundamentally, what is different? We are not starting now this time with store and process, right? We're starting with asking the end customer needs and expectation, and then process next, and then infrastructure last. That's fundamentally turning the whole thing 180 degrees
All correct. Because
reverse,
we started with
right?
infrastructure, right? All my
Yeah,
projects, I start with infrastructure first, then process, finally consumer. That's how I have worked always.
yeah. So we are reversing the sequence. We're starting with the consumer, because what we realize is we've got all the infra, but we have not been able to deliver the product,
Hmm.
right? So we're starting with the product. And by the way, the observability and the other things that you brought up is actually about, they're getting, these layers are actually getting added because there is a feeling that this is missing and that piece is missing, and now the contracts are missing, and they're coming one after another, also signifying that what consumer is asking is actually a product,
Yeah.
right? So no artificial boundaries, the metrics, the advance. We've had multiple stacks, right? If you've looked at the stack diagram that I shared before, and that did not even cover the ML side complexity. There's another big fragmented stack out there for ML. Then there's data lake, which I didn't cover in that stack. So there's a maze and maze of technology out there, and that varies by the technology uh, that one is using, right? Now, what we're doing with this particular method is we're collapsing these differences. We're saying everything is analytics, right? There's no artificial boundary, right? So metrics, advanced analytics, your dashboards, your classical ML, everything is a product of a different kind, right? It's not different
Okay.
materially on how you build them.
Yeah, where is the data engineering piece here? Again, second, our audience are all data engineers. Will they all become data product engineers, data product owners?
Everybody is a data product engineer. We'll talk
Okay.
about it. Everybody is a data
Okay.
product
So
engineer.
okay. After this call, guys, go update your LinkedIn.
Yeah. Man.
Yeah.
Okay. So there's another thing here. So the consumption interface, right? We've had consumption interface as BI exclusively, or we've had SQL, or we've had, for instance, in the ML case, we've had a lot of API interfaces as consumption interfaces, right? And then we've started having these custom apps built used on top of reverse ETL and stuff like that, right? So data products basically say, hey, all of those consumption interfaces are valid, and the product should support whichever interface makes sense, or whichever set of interface makes sense for the consumer,
Yeah.
right? The final thing, the data product catalog is what you need for visibility and engagement of the product. So one of the other principles is, because we're saying product, you also need product management, right? How do you manage the revisions? How do you manage the upgrades? How do you manage retiring a product, right? And all of these things need management, right? By the way, even today, your tables need, I mean, suppose you wanted a new column or XYZ, and you wanted to rename a column for whatever reason, it's not easy for you to make that change in the warehouse without knowing the impact of that change.
Yeah.
And this also brings back to the product life cycle, which is, hey, how do I really make changes which are often very softly done in software products, but are not so easy to do in the data products today, or the data world today, right? So the revision management, the upgrades, all the product niceties of the product management, all of that comes in when we talk about the data product, right? So I want to pause here before we get into the last 3 slides. If anybody wants to sort of throw a question.
Don't see any questions so far. Anybody having questions? Again, we can take 1 or 2. Probably you can unmute your line. Go ahead, ask the question.
None? Okay.
People are very clear.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. So
no. We'll take the questions towards the end. Yeah, Rajesh, go ahead. You're in interest of time.
So I'm now getting into the true anatomy piece for this later part and the next call. When we have this is what we're going to get deeper into, which is in my mind, of course, there can be more categorization, but there are 5 kinds of data products. The first is the domain data model products. I'm calling it model. You can probably check that out. The second is the metrics dashboard data products. Your question of where does the data engineer fit? He probably fits in the first 3 today, but nothing stops him from moving further down either, right? See, at the end of the day, the data engineers have the best skill because they are closer to the programmers. You get it, right? And they would fit this bill far better than the others.
Yeah.
Having said that, the data products will also come, the frameworks that we will eventually talk about will also have self-service interface. So it'll look pretty similar in terms of ease of development. It's just that it'll be a slightly different environment.
Yeah.
Right. The third is advanced analytics products. This is kind of a space which always needed a name. But there are a lot of cases which are neither, or use cases which are neither ML nor BI. They usually fall in the statistical realm or lightweight algorithms or lightweight forecasting, so on and so forth. Even things like factor analysis, sequence analytics. There are more. For instance, we can talk about cohorts, right? A lot of these things can fall into the realm of advanced analytics, which is the third category, right? And then we have the classical ML data products. These are regular classification, regression, predictions, credit risk default models, all of those. And then you have the fifth category. This again, I have loosely coupled it, but I do believe that this would be real as we go further, because the data products would make this really happen. And what is this really? I'll talk a little bit more about it. For example, today, if you want, you have a BI dashboard and you actually want to show an output of a forecasting engine, or let's say a classical ML model, along with the output of the regular metrics together, because they make sense, it's not very easy to do today, because most of the BI dashboards are built with SQLs. Unless you put that data back into some SQL engine, you're not going to be able to do that. That is the first issue, right? The second is, in real life, you don't ask a question of a certain kind. You almost every single time ask questions which further have a chain of more questions. And those questions can be descriptive, predictive, diagnostic, and all kinds, right? And that theoretically means that you need a product at some point where you can traverse between various kinds of questions in a more user convenient way. Let's say I'm actually diagnosing a certain metric. I'm looking at a certain metric, and now I have further question. Hey, what's causing the dip to my sales, right? And then when I actually understand those factors, I further want to know, hey, assuming this is the current state, how does my forecast look now, right? And these are the kind of questions that would fall in the category 5 or multi-model data products, where the user experience, the user interface, all of that will have to be funded, right? So from L1 to L5, you're going up on the modeling complexity. You're also going up on the feature richness, both in terms of the user interface component as well as the data and the code component.
Thanks.
Right?
Yeah.
I have just 2 slides. Do we
Yeah.
have problems?
I think we should be able to cover it. And there's an interesting question, which I think we should take after that, after your slides.
Okay. So just what I did in the previous version of the presentation of the slide, the first one is L1 data, which is domain data model products, right? Or domain data products, as I call it. Now, what is a domain data product? By the way, this is also prevalent in today's stack because there's a lot of discussion around semantic modeling, semantic layers, all of that, because at some point you want to see the consumer. Let's say if you're a finance guy, and we already said we want to reduce friction to consumption, right? Earlier.
Right.
Now, if you're a finance guy and you're saying, hey, you're seeing an attribute called cash flow. Now, the next question you would have is it cash flow? Is it discounted cash flow? Right? Now, if let's say you have this as a table and a field in a table, the name will not really tell you whether it's a cash flow or a discounted cash flow unless it's well documented and well defined in the first place, right? And the finance guys obviously want to see their models and their representation. That would help them reduce the friction.
Yeah.
Right? So domain models essentially brings in this conceptual representation of business objects, right? How does the finance look at his own customer? Let's say if there's a customer entity in the finance, or let's say in sales or marketing, how do each of these guys look at customer, and what is their mental model of how the customer looks?
Yeah.
Right. So that language, we will call that language as semantics, not the syntax, right? Here, because we're not talking about SQL or the column name and all of that here.
Yeah.
Right? The language part of it, right, has to become domain specific. And the data tables and the fields that you have in that schema has to make sense for, let's say, if you're building a customer data domain model for sales, has to make sense for the sales. Or if you're, so we're shifting the problem which we left all the way to the right for the data mart guys or the BI guys to figure out, and we're shifting it all the way to the left. This is the first step, right? So the consumption can happen right at the origination instead of long pole ETL and flowing through buckets and buckets, essentially. And so domain models essentially convert the tables at the entry itself. So you're basically joining multiple data sources, and then you're creating an output table, which should look like the domain representation of that specific object. And at this point, we will not call, even though it's still a table, but we'll not call it a table. We'll probably call it a model, and we'll not call the fields as columns. We'll probably call them as attributes and entities. Or let's say dimensions and facts, right? So instead of using dimensions and facts, we'll probably call them as attributes and entities in some ways, right? So that takes the exact business representation of how the sales is going to actually see the finance model, or rather the customer model, right? So what you're really doing is the step one is when you engage with the functions, you first start with engaging in, hey, tell us what are the most common business entities and objects that you would like to see. And that is a language that you use to convert the raw data that you have then to the language, to the model that the customer actually is expecting.
Yeah.
Right. So this is the final one of this. I've just covered a very uh, high level anatomy of how would a domain model actually be built.
Domain model data product, right?
Domain model data product.
Perfect.
Right. Let's say we're talking about a customer here. Right. Now, what do you do as a data engineer today? You bring in data from various sources using some connectors, right? You put it in a version, or actually today it's not version, but you put it in the raw data store. Unless you had a data lake and you were versioning, you would probably have a raw data store or a landing area in your data warehouse today, right? So this part is common. There's not much that has changed here, right? But at every step, remember the observability and the data quality that we talked about? I'm sorry. At every step, you're basically collecting the telemetry of that step and adding the observability data. For instance, at this step, what really happened is I got my raw data. I would have probably collected the stats of what that raw data looked like, collected the initial lineage in intermediate snapshots, all of that at this step. This automatically flows into what we call input validation and agreements. Now, assuming you've had agreements with the upstream, then you would obviously execute the rules which are specific to those agreements.
Yeah.
Or you would do the input validation that you're anyway doing. And if, let's say, the data now meets the expectation, then it will obviously go to building the domain-specific model that you're building, which is in this case customer model, let's say, right?
Mm-hmm.
This model then further flows into the output checks and the agreement compliance. And then it gets into, is it ready for consumption? Is it meeting the expectation? If yes, it gets into the output bucket, which is, let's say, in the data warehouse terminology, the production area, right? And then gets published to the marketplace. In today's world, the marketplace is the catalog. However, you have no way to publish the catalog. It's typically the poll mode, as I understand.
Yeah.
Right?
The catalog reads the data, not the other way around.
Not the other way around. But the data products world, the same thing does exist, except that it's always the product announcing that I'm available. Like what would happen in the case of Amazon catalog, let's say, or Swiggy catalog. If there's a change in the menu, it would be the product owner who will do the change in the menu. Swiggy cannot change the menu, or Swiggy does not poll for anything. Right? That actually, if you think about it, actually simplifies catalogs greatly. Because the catalogs just become a presentation layer at that point.
Yeah. Presentation, or what they call it as catalog of catalogs. But then, I get what you're meaning. You'll have a product catalog which is more active as opposed to any regular catalog that's more passive, looking for changes and all of it, right? So that it's always a catalog polling. It's not the other way around. The products do not poll and feed into the catalog, right? Unless there's an API, which is again making it passive. It's not active, actually.
Yeah. Right. So I think the same goes with observability. For instance, you see that you have observability. How does observability work today? It also connects to your data warehouse and every other piece in the stack.
Yeah.
From BI to everything to paint an end-to-end picture. In this particular case, the observability, data, telemetry, all of that is what comes from the product. The product pushes it to the portal. And what that does is makes the observability tools fairly simpler to build. Right? They do not have to do as many integrations that they're doing today.
Yeah.
Right? Let's say it didn't meet my expectation, the input data didn't meet my expectation, then you basically go to the next step where you say, hey, can we clean it? If yes, then you basically apply the cleaners. This is probably some libraries that you have. You go back again, check if it meets expectation. If it does, then go build the model, flow through the thing, and that's basically how your
Domain model is built.
domain
The domain
model
product.
anatomy is. I have
Perfect.
not right. The domain model specific processes within that blue box, but everything else is common to every domain model.
Yeah. One thing I would like to understand, Rajesh, probably the next step is, or probably in one of the subsequent calls, or we can write a blog on it. Also, is like, what are the stacks that people should look at to even build this, right? So how do I meet expectations today? Like observability, should I have another product? How do I store telemetry data? Like, is there a product available for it? How do I build a cleaners? I think let's also go there somewhere in one of the subsequent sessions. But I would like to take one question here. Very interesting question coming from Purushottam and Nupur, right? So, what is the backward mechanism to make existing data product dimension fact table to a data product? I think fantastic question from Puru, because this is what we've been building today, right? How do we make what we have today into a data product?
No, I think this is a very interesting debate. Actually, if you think about it, the facts and dimension tables that we have today are also another form of modeling, if you will, right?
Yeah.
I'm calling them entities and attributes in some ways, right?
Yeah.
Having said that, the big difference here is the facts and measures are very data professional centric. They do not carry the meaning of what the consumer really, or how the consumer really thinks about his model of how he makes the decision using that data.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's why they increase. So probably they're introducing a semantic layer there, right? So
yeah. So we're adding layers and layers on top, which is further making it complex. Now that's one of the ways. If you're wanting to do it on top of the existing one, you probably add a semantic layer on top,
yeah.
right? But why would it still not be very effective is because, see, one of the big things about data products is, or let's say the domain models, which is the step one of building any data product, is that you're filtering information from which is lying in tables, which the consumer 99% of the time is never going to use it or want to see. You're also reducing the friction or the stress on his eye to see so much information which he's not really going to be ever using.
Yeah.
Right. So you're also filtering after having discussed coming up with right domain models, all the information which was unnecessary.
Yeah, I'm
right?
with you.
Imagine, yeah. Right. So we've also done the cleanup in terms of the language. We've also done cleanup in terms of what we store on the package that we're selling. And we've done cleanup in terms of the amount of data that flows further into other data products.
Yeah. So okay, let me reconstruct what you just said and try to put it in a typical simple data engineering way that I'm very familiar with. So yeah, a demo fact can be made into a data product, but I have to build a little bit more non-functional requirements around that to make it a data product, right? Add observability, add agreements, add expectations, add telemetry. It makes it very complex. Is it easier to rebuild things from scratch, Rajesh, or looking at?
Actually, all of that in the sequence looks difficult. It's actually putting the work front end. See, today what's happening is all of this work has gone to the infrastructure.
Yeah.
And the problem is it hasn't solved the challenge when that bad number shows up on the dashboard.
Yeah.
Right. So building it right upfront is really what you're doing here so that you face less pain during the running phase.
Perfect.
Right? If the contracts never breaks, if the number never actually gets to a wrong one, let's say, then you saved a lot of time in the running phase.
Yeah.
Right. So then all that pain upfront is worth it, essentially.
Yeah, agree. But then, yeah, I think in enterprises, it's going to be like a debate and a trade-off between, hey, I'm paying, either it's we are optimizing for cost or we are optimizing for time. This is like I'm optimizing for both at the same time, right? So it's not either or, it's an
Yeah.
and here, and that basically comes to the debate saying that where do I start? What's the low hanging fruit? I think it'll then be like uh, rewiring your entire house. You do it
No,
entirely at one shot, right? So it little makes it a little difficult, right?
no, it's not actually. I mean, look,
Okay,
there are starting points in everything, and this also has a starting point.
yeah,
And if there is time, then we can cover it in the next session.
I think we should, yeah.
But this also has a starting point, and it's actually much simpler. It's not really a complex
Got
topic.
it. Perfect, perfect. Any other questions? I know we're set 9 minutes over time as usual, and people are staying back. Any other questions from anyone? Probably you can unmute your line or go ask your questions.
So I have one if nobody else wants to ask. Ashwin, you mentioned that it is coming up in conversations, right?
Yeah.
Data products. Now,
Yeah.
of course, Rajesh went into the anatomy of the products and so on. What is your read of their conceptualization of the products? When they say data products, what do they mean?
Oh yeah, very different from what we are talking about, but largely leading to that pathway as well. See, most of the customers that I'm talking about, to partners or customers as well, they're talking about their mesh and then leading to their products as well. So, like I would say, 60-70% of them coming from hey, there's an organizational-wide initiative to start with the mesh-based architecture today. So if that's the case, it's a lot more easier because they have identified a function, they've identified a set of domains, and they're building from there. And they're heavily focused around rebuilding over for one particular domain. Now, I see them largely talking about most of the efforts we covered here, but then one thing that they easily miss is the serviceability layer. Right? They don't talk about that in at least in the conversation that I have had. They focus on observability, contracts, quality, trust, and the deployment is largely around a warehouse as well. So it's built over a warehouse with all of these layers added like an icing on the cake. It's all wrapped around, right? So all of the non-functional requirements of a product wrapped around that particular data element that's lying on the warehouse or lakehouse or wherever it is. Now, what is clearly missing, even in my conversations, is how does the product life cycle work? How do they manage and expose, distribute the product, as well as the serviceability of the product, right? I think they're still in early conversations. I think the early versions of data products, in my point of view, would be something that's, I think, how Purushottam and Oppo has asked, it would probably be refactoring the warehouse, but at least starting with some of the non-functional requirements being wrapped around and then getting exposed. And I think as the maturity curve goes ahead in the industry, as well as companies start developing data products and building stacks to help customers build data products like what Rajesh is building, what will happen is we will then start talking about how do I manage a life cycle? How do I feed in the contracts? How do I look at the serviceability or the deployability of the entire data product? I think that part I have not started having conversations, right? I think if that helps you, Venkat.
Yeah, it sounds like Rajesh had a slide where he talked about the sequence, right? The consumer, then the process, then the technology. It sounds like the story that you're hearing, at least in January, February of 2023, is one of a linear extension of what we already have today. I mean, all of these tools are getting deployed.
Yeah.
The second thing is that the worldview is could be still characterized as infrastructure centric, right? We are talking about.
I think we, in the absence of tools, see again.
How much is domain involved in all of this?
It is heavy. It is heavy. It's like when they are refactoring it, at least in most of the conversations that I'm having, it's all domain. That's the foundation on which they're building. So that is different. Okay. Let me clarify that. It's built on a warehouse, but it is completely controlled on a domain. It is decentralized, right? So that's where they're starting. It's a domain on which, on top of all of these wrappers are built. Again, I made it super simple and said, hey, it's built on a warehouse, but then it's on a domain by warehouse, but then they're largely leveraging the infrastructure and the investment that they've already made on. So they're not refactoring, restructuring a lot of things. The data is there,
I think
and they're refactoring from there.
like I said in one of the slides where there was a comment from VentureBeat, I think, where they said that move from warehouse to lake house, right?
Lake houses, yeah.
But having said that, for the domain products, you don't even have to do that today, right? Because then what happens is your warehouse simply becomes an engine and the storage layer. But all the logic, business logic, connections, the expectations, the contract is all part of the code that you're actually factoring on top of that storage engine, right? So I think that's definitely one imagination. Although my personal view is eventually you will have to add the product life cycle, the product management bit, all of that to it, the discovery piece, some of the things that I made simpler so that we can digest was not there in the anatomy. But as I add that in the next session, you would probably appreciate that we would not reduce the complexity if we don't really refactor some of these architectures.
I think we will evolve, Rajesh. In my point of view, it's only going to go up and mature from whatever we are doing today. But at least people are starting to think in the direction of, hey, I'm developing something that needs to be trust in this. It needs to be discovered and all of that. And data engineers are playing a role in the overall life cycle of all of this. Right? And that's a key part. Any other questions? I think we should
have
go
a question
for it.
For the audience. If people want to answer, how many of you use data contracts today? If anybody?
I don't think so. A lot of people will use data contracts.
How many use the input validation in their stored procedures? Anybody?
Ganesh, Harish, Pro, Ravi, RK, Shri, Vignesh, Vineet, iPhone. Yeah. I see. Again, if people use data quality check. Again, Harish or someone, do you want to unmute your line, share? Like, do you use input validation before reading data? Like Harish, Ganesh?
Yes. We do have data quality checks, and we read we do all the process to read it. There are certain things that has been discussed today, like data products and everything, where I do see a challenge or barrier is that you talked about example of Kellogg's that you right, where you gives a raw product, then you give us a good data product where you call it out, it's always consistent, right? People tend to live to that, but when they dive into the infrastructure, right, there's a challenge saying that we always want to have one data present in the table, but we want to serve it in different flavors. How anyone can achieve that challenge by having only one data present and build different logics on the fly? Because as and when the infrastructure gets developed, people started to use MPP systems and all the advanced analytics engines and everything. That concludes that you always end up having only one data. Earlier, a decade ago, you will be having like same data in different flavor in multiple tables because it's harder to do the analytical engine on the fly. So
So now, same conversation, Harish, what me and Rajesh were probably exchanging earlier in the day. I think you're kind of leading there. Harish, just pausing here, right? You're coming from an insurance background, right? If I'm not wrong, again.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. In the US, if I'm not wrong, right?
Yes, right.
Okay, perfect. Yeah.
So now the thing is, everyone wants to move to the advanced engine, and they say that we always have one data, but we want to serve different people, and there are certain constraints where one can build only certain logic. It's not possible to have many flavors at one shot, and that's always have consistent. There are challenges to it. I'm not saying no to your idea, but I'm saying that there are some challenge towards it, considering that they want to stick to one thing and they want other thing, which is quite not possible by not matching or meeting certain qualities, right? So what do you see in the future, how people will look up and see and meet the data products consistency by also achieving the same data? That's a challenge I could see, but I don't have a solution. I can simply post a question. Yep, that's it.
No, I think it's a valid question. I think I've probably fairly understood what you're saying, but here's what I understand. You're basically saying that there is data, which is you're talking about the raw data here, right? Or which is not consistent. Is that what you mean?
No. What I mean to tell here is that data is initially it is consistent. Like a Kellogg's flavor, people will load and they will confirm that it is a Kellogg's. I take it from the corn, I filtered it, I make it as Kellogg's. Now, I mean a corn, which is consumable. Now, if you want to serve it Kellogg's or anyone, it always has to be consistent. That between the initial corn flakes and the final Kellogg's, there's a list of different processes that will make always consistent. For example, the grams.
Yeah.
This package should have different grams and it should have certain these are the consistency. Now in the data warehousing, people what they would like to do here is they would store the conflict on table, and we are talking about it should be always be consistent. So the process between the conflicts and the Kellogg's package, there's a list of different process. All they want to do here is a logical model and not physical storage. And why they do is that because they are into advanced analytics engine and they think that systems can handle it and we don't want to have multiple store the data, and they want to drive that and they think that this is what the advanced process we should follow it. But sometimes they fail to achieve what is the important thing, that is a data product. How do you see that? That's my question.
No, I think so that's also the reason why we've had 3 sessions here in a series, right? This is clearly going to need a lot of mindset change here, right? And it's a 30-year of legacy. It's not Snowflake. It's 30 years we've been doing the same thing, right? The difference and why this is different this time is fundamentally because if you just go back pre-pandemic, right? And we were all in Teradata and the world was fairly controlled and the number of users were fairly controlled. And now, on an average, even a mid-sized company has 110 different data sources, and they have a numerous number of consumers and numerous number of use cases. Now, with so much of things that have changed just from pre-pandemic to movement to cloud to where we stand today in terms of the explosion of use cases, the expectation of the consumer, right? A lot of things that we weren't really worried about earlier are now becoming table stake. And they will become even more prominent and pronounced as we get into the future. And what amazes me is the change and the speed of change. I mean, now it's almost given that everybody says there are 220 or 440 SaaS apps that a large enterprise has, right? Now, data warehouses were never connecting to that many applications if you just go back 5 years, right? Now, let's say you ended up connecting, but how are you going to manage the quality with so many sources funneling into the data warehouse? It's just something that we've never thought about. We're not able to do it. And hence the concepts of observability, all of these are cropping up, right? And they're only coming up because we are trying to address the symptoms as we're seeing it today, right? But can that really be away from the final solution? The answer could be yes to that too, right? So what we're talking about here is we are catching the symptoms and then saying that, hey, we missed that. But maybe what we need is a product creation, which essentially encapsulates all of these things that the consumer really needs, right? So I probably not directly answered your question, but if you wanted to go answer, go ahead.
I think what Harish is talking about is today already there is a proliferation of tables in the warehouse, and as we empower the analytics users with more and more access, they are creating their own derived tables and so on. So in the earlier world, at least we had a controlled notion of what a fact table was and what a domain table was, and so on. Now we have the chaos of all of these derived products. Now it sounds like the technology evolution is creating the next set of challenges, which is 5 different notions of risk, 10 different notions of customer conversion, and so on. Because each one has their own, each derived product will have implement its own. So I think Harish's thing was point, if I understood correctly, is are we exchanging today's chaos in the warehouse with tomorrow's chaos at the product level?
Yeah, kind of. I think, again, just doing a time check here. We're 23 minutes past our session planned time. So any other questions? Again, Harish, thanks for that question. I think probably we should connect offline on this also around because I come from the same world as where Harish comes from, building data warehouses and all of it. So it sometimes becomes very hard for, it's a cultural aspect at an organization level, right? Everybody needs to think around, hey, can I move from beyond these fact tables, dimension tables into create finished goods that people can start consuming and drive value out of it in a repeatable fashion. I think Rajesh's first point was repeatability. I like the fact. I mean, that's key. Now, repeatability is just not delivering the data every single day. It's about driving then trust and the other non-functional requirements that we spoke about. I think we are getting there in parts. I somehow wish we had the right technology stack that's available to do everything in one piece. And I think that's what I think, Rajesh, you're trying to build. Venkat, you're trying to build. Ganesh, and I think E6 Data, he's also on the call. I think he's trying to build the access layer, but then he's also trying to contribute to that. Right? I think in parts and pieces, I think we need modern thinking towards the problem and modern products. I think with legacy products, we'll get stuck into, or if we are forced into thinking SED type 2, dimensional modeling, facts and dimensions. That's a problem. If you're still stuck in the legacy tooling, that's what I also face at times, right? So, final questions. Anybody else, like one or two? We can take one more in the interest of time. Perfect. I know it's 10:30 for those folks from India. Thank you for staying back, and for folks in the US. At least Shri from Google, Harish, you're from the US, Vineet, you're from the US. Thank you for your time today in your morning. Have a wonderful day ahead. And for folks in India, thank you for joining in. Have a wonderful rest of the evening. Bye-bye.
Happy Holi.
Happy Holi as well. Hey, happy Holi as well. Hope we're celebrating. Thank you. Bye.